Hello, and welcome to LakeView Listens, Lakeview Lutheran Church's monthly podcast. Each month, we are here to provide space for experiences, ideas, and people that have significant impact on our communities, both large and small. Through these conversations, we hope to inspire, empower, and enlighten you, the listener. I'm your host, Zachariah Schmidt, on staff at LVLC, and today I'm here for episode 14 with Doug Hinshaw. Doug, I'm so glad to see you and to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for being here today.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and I'll tell you, it was always a surprise when I saw you growing up when you were playing for me when I did the Lord's Prayer at the church at the big anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
I remember you from when you were like 6 or 7 years old at the church, and you were already
Mm-hmm.
playing the piano like an expert. And was your mother was Zelly was at the church.
Mm-hmm.
But it's funny that I remember when you were leaving to go to Georgia. I guess you were like about 16 or 17 years old. And then next time I saw you, the man walking around that was going to give me a program where we would have rehearsals, because the
Mm-hmm.
Lord's Prayer, the classical division, is a little different than in your prayer book. And you work with me beautifully. I mean, you really helped me through so beautifully.
Yeah, it
So
was a great honor to be able to do that, and a lot of fun to be able to work with you and to perform that with you. I had a great time to
I was
be able
watching
to
your
do
lips.
that.
You were playing. It had a lot of rest that, when you take it out of the prayer book, the whole congregation is singing and there's no stopping them at any place. But you helped me through the rest,
Yeah.
like 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, da da da. We went on. But it
Mm-hmm.
turned out great.
Sure.
It turned out really good.
Yeah, it did.
And
It did. It
you come from a
was
musical
beautiful. You
family.
sing beautifully.
Well, I tried, and what I think a couple of people said at the end, they had never heard it that way, but I thought I owe it to Zachariah. But someone was saying they started crying there at the end, and I thought I didn't mean to make anybody cry. But anyway, everything turned out beautifully.
It did, yeah. So I'm wondering where you would like to start. You've lived quite the life, and I know there's several places we could kind of start, and several different things we could talk about, but just kind of
I'll
yeah,
the theater
wondering.
real quick, and I'll come to here because I've had a whole life here since 1966 here in Chicago. And before that, I
Mm-hmm.
was living out of trunks and everything all over the world, And before that, I was born in Washington, D.C., and
Mm-hmm.
I worked with the uh, National Security Agency. And then when I wasn't doing that, I was teaching classical dance, the Russian style, because I was with the National Ballet as a soloist and working there. And then I left and went to New York, and I left the area. I lived in Mount Rainier, which is right up against Washington, D.C. And I miss it very much. But I mean, Chicago, I've been here longer than any place I've ever lived in my life. Before that,
Mm-hmm.
when I went to New York, I got a contract to work in Atlanta. It was a theatrical. And then from there, came back to Chicago, not Chicago, but to, before that, I worked all over, and I won't go into all the areas, but they were theater. I worked in about 10 different Broadway shows. And the first
Mm-hmm.
one I worked was Inherit the Wind. And that was a major, won all the Emmy Awards and everything. And then but when I started working for Screen Actors Guild, I'd worked at AFTRA, American Federation in TV and Radio, and I'd worked in also SAG and Screen Extras and Screen Actors Guild. But I worked in the theater. I worked in North Africa, in Algeria, worked in
Hmm.
Croatia, worked in Paris as Mark Anthony. That was, and my partner, she was the assistant choreographer of the Ed Sullivan Show at that time. This goes back into the 19 late 1950s, 58, 59. And then I went back to Los Angeles and we lived there for about 8 years. Lived in Hollywood, but I don't want to think I was just a Hollywood guy, But I mean, I had an agent out there, and I worked different shows. And I came in touch with um, the big producer, and he started putting me in shows in Las Vegas, in New York, in London, and Paris. At the Lido, he had me as playing a role as Mark Anthony, where you had to act, dance, and sing. People said, "How did you do that?" People don't realize theater is a full-time job, and it involves 24/7. Your real relaxation is when you're on stage. The real hard work is when you are between contracts. But even when you have a contract, you're always looking for the next contract and the next producer to find. So I won't go into all the different Broadway shows. I'll mention a couple, which was Inherit the Wind. That was my first Actors Equity. But before that, I'd worked all over the world. So, they took me in. I was a replacement in the show. And it was really fantastic because that's where I started into Actors Equity. After that, I could go to all the auditions, not open calls for the general public, and I would go in one Broadway show after the other. But in between, this was mainly in New York. I had an agent who had me doing modeling. Of all things that I look back on, and I'll tell you, I was I had a physique then. Now I'm just sort of a skinny uh, of myself. I'm I'm I just turned 89 years old and I'm doing great. Most people think I should
So,
already. Go ahead.
Inherit the Wind was your first kind of maybe big break. It sounds like
In the Broadway and all that. Before that, I had big breaks with the producer in Hollywood who had me work in Paris as Mark Anthony. And then I came back to the States, opened the Stardust in Las Vegas. They took the whole show, 100 people. And we all landed, I remember, in New York. Of course, we had a cast of beautiful gals from all over the English possessions throughout the world. And the press was there, but they put us up in Central Park South before we took the rest of our commuting plane. The jets hadn't come in yet. It was like a 13-hour crossing from Paris to New York, and then another 9 or 13 hours to get to Las Vegas. And I remember we landed at 2 a.m, and they said, it's cooler now. It was a lot hotter. If you've ever been to Vegas in the summer, and we landed there in May, it was already like 90, like 117. They said, it's cooler now. And I remember when they opened up the plane, the press was all there for the very beautiful girls coming down the stairs and everything. And when I got to the door to leave, I thought, this is unbelievable. It was like opening the door. It was cooler in Vegas. It was 98 degrees at 2 a.m. in the morning. But that was a whole period. It was wonderful. And I worked for Darn Arden was the producer. He's passed on now. He was our shows. I didn't go on with them for that because I didn't want. I'd already been living out of a big steamer trunk, where you had daily clothes, daily shoes. It was one of those big ones that were just something else. you could go anywhere and you had your right, all your clothes, a tuxedo if you needed or whatever. But it was great.
Did you have sort of a favorite out of all these locations that you were performing, that you were working out of? Did you have a favorite spot, a favorite location, a favorite
My
city?
favorite
That
was the show in Paris where I played Mark Anthony. And
hmm,
I had to, I had people say, "How do you do all that?" I said, "Well, when you're in theater, in between, I worked at IBM on Third Avenue, world headquarters. I also worked at other things, doing modeling. And the strangest one, you're probably too young to remember. I'm sure you are, but I did all the
hmm,
things. A statue of me. It was a man-made statue where the men's clothing were, and all I had on was a small pair of underwear. That's what they were for sale for. I
hmm,
always laugh about it. I wouldn't do it today, but in those days, it showed a little bit of skin. I was, very
hmm,
muscular. Now
hmm,
I'm just a rather thin person, but I worked all over, and I came here with the Broadway show, Carol Channing, and I did that in New York, and then when he left, Carol, they took the show, and Mary Martin took over the show. No, not Mary Martin was one of them. There were three or four people that played her role in New York. And when I came with Hello Dolly, we went all over the country. We first went over to put the rest of the company together in Los Angeles. Rehearsals. That was like about 1960, something like that. When you were probably a thought, but many of you weren't born then. But
hmm,
anyway, that's how I came to Chicago. We went all over the United States. We even opened the big Civic Theater and everything in Los Angeles, which had for ballet, for opera, for acting. Then we went to San Francisco and then the rest of the country, all over. And we came here. Of course, when we left Los Angeles, it was real warm, very warm. And I remember we crossed the country, our whole cast in a big special train with all the scenery for the show. And we stopped on the other side of Davenport before we crossed the Mississippi to come to Chicago. And we were a show that had lots of sweet pets. Everybody got off who had dogs to the train stop to let them have a little bit of exercise, etc. But when I got off the train, I thought, wow, I hope my clothes will be right because it was already like about 29 or 25 degrees. And when we had left
hmm,
the coast, it was warm. So first thing I still have it. I got here to Chicago, and our first Chicago engagement was for the Democratic Party with
hmm,
the mayor and the whole Democratic Party. It wasn't. It was at the big theater downtown L.A., downtown Chicago. Excuse me, folks. And it was just great. But the first thing I did, because most of the cast, we were right off Michigan Avenue, they put us in two big hotels. And I remember I went over to Michigan Avenue and I bought a winter coat. Now, that was in
hmm.
many years ago. I still have that coat. It's all these years, it's the best winter coat I ever had. But I enjoyed it. And it gave me a different thing. I was with Hello Dolly. And when I left that, I had a couple more things with theater. I worked with Nancy Sinatra. Again, you might remember the song when you were kids or whatever. It was her big hit for Nancy Sinatra was "These Boots Are Made for Walking." Where it goes
Hmm.
dun 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 dun, and then she'd say, "Are you ready, Boots?" And I say, "Ready," and I'd come out and join her on stage in the big
Wow.
spotlight. That was her big number. And of
Yeah,
course, her
yeah.
father,
That must have been something.
Sinatra, was still alive. And
Yeah.
it was quite thrilling. But that was
Hmm,
one of the things. But I made up my mind I was going to move into the business sector. So I had about a year of English and writing with NYU in New York, because rather than just waste my time when I had any time off during the day, besides taking voice lessons, because I studied opera, worked with Patrice Munsell in The Merry Widow. And of course, Patrice had a big house out in the island from New York. She was married to the president of NBC. She was marvelous. I met her when I was working in Paris. There's a place all the Americans go on the left bank, and we were getting the show to bring to the Lido, and I was playing the role of Mark Anthony, and the rest of the cast. And I was introduced to her at this place where all the Americans go to meet French people, but all the French people come there, and that's where I met Patrice Munsell. I didn't know her, and I didn't know that one day I'd be working with her in The Merry Widow. But I had studied.
And this was in Paris.
In Paris, yeah. I met her at that cafe where all the Americans go, and the guy that was the basso profundo, or the bass, for our show knew her very well. He'd worked at the Metropolitan Opera. You know, Patrice was the baby diva for the opera, for the Metropolitan Opera at that time. But she had a little bump in her tummy, and she said, "Don't mind that." She says, "I'm on my way to appear in Madrid at the opera there." And she said, "I'll probably have a baby there." And she said, "I always name them names that are similar to where I'm performing." She performed all over the world. When she wasn't living at the Hamptons in New York, she had like a palace home out there, she and her husband. But later on, I worked with her, but I studied many teachers. I studied with the Fokines from Russia. His mother, Madame Fedorova, who was the greatest ballerina. They were with the big ballet company, and they were the people that represented the royals at the Mariinsky Theater in Russia. They were there in 1918 when the Navy went with the communists, and the rest of the army was fighting Germany at that time, without and within. And there was just one of those things that they eventually, Mr. Fokine, who was my teacher, he graduated from the Royal Academy in classical dance. You might think they're just out there dancing. They had to study science, arrangement, musical, and every day they reported to the school in a military uniform. It was, and that's how they taught their classes. So you didn't say, I'm going to try. They'd say, you do it. You're going to do it. And I mean, perfect. And it was great. I had read about them in books and things, and when I was in high school, and when I started dancing, it's always funny how one thing leads to another. My mother and my father, if there was a crack in the street, I would fall up I'd find it. Went on years later after I left theater, and I worked as a mental health clinician with my degree and everything. But I realized why I would fall down in a crack in the sidewalk. It was my way of getting attention. It took me to be a mental health clinician before I found out what it was all about. And but I worked so many things. You name it, I did it. When I first went to Los Angeles, when our contract was fine, we were in Atlanta a whole summer. We were booked from New York, and the rest of the place at the Monteleone in New Orleans was canceled, and the big other hotel up in. So I got on the bus. I thought, gee, it's fall. So that means all the Broadway shows have been really cast. And so my partner, her husband, he was our orchestra leader. Eventually they married, but we went, and we were sitting in the bus station at Atlanta, and she used to call him Papa. She said, "Look at the map. Let's go to Hollywood." And I thought, that'll lead me to go to New York by myself. So I went with him Hollywood, and we rolled across the United States in a trailway bus. It was like the movie. We went across the country, and we were just in that bus for almost a week, rolling continuously, nonstop across the whole country. And that's how I came to go to Los Angeles and work all the different
Quite,
things.
yeah, that's quite an experience being in all these different places. Was this something that you enjoyed, being in place after place after place, or was it something you just felt like you kind of had to do, like one opportunity led to the next, and that's
Yeah,
just kind of how
some of
it
them were
was?
beautiful. Like when I went to New York, and I had worked at Army headquarters in Washington as a cryptologist and all that with NSA. So when I went to New York, the thing is that I got a job, immediately at World headquarters over on Third Avenue. I was in the department, that hires and finds out where all the employees were.
Mm,
So that was a change, and I worked at. I never told them that I'd come to New York because I was going to do theater. Because after I get off from work there, I was living right at Midtown. I would go and take either twice a week a vocal, not only for opera but for popular songs, auditions, and all that. But a vocal monologue, if they wanted that when you were auditioning and making the rounds. But
mm,
what did I do? In the contracts, I eventually did things like I drove trucks. I drove a forklift trucks in. This is when I got to Los Angeles because I didn't know anybody. Now Betty
mhm,
Lorraine, who was my partner, and she had put the act together, and Morrow, they knew people from when they were in New York. She was originally from Des Moines, Iowa, but she'd come to Chicago and got her start there at the one of the Hilton hotels when Rod Alexander and Bambi Lynn were there, and that was her stepping stone to go to New York. She did all kinds of Broadway shows. Eventually, became the assistant choreographer for the Ed Sullivan Show, which is they still go from
mm,
that theater. It's on Seventh Avenue where Broadway ends, and going up towards Central Park South and Central Park. But
mm.
it was amazing. I did everything when I was in LA. I didn't know anybody. I was
Yeah.
even I would go until I got a apartment or a room of my own. And by the way, when LA is one of the most expensive places you want to go, other than Chicago or New York, and
Mhm.
it was just amazing. I would work at any kind of job, and I went and got a job at a warehouse downtown on Figueroa Street in LA. And the guy said, "Can you drive a truck?" And I didn't know whether I could. But I said yes because he said no. There was a lot of explanation. And he said, "Well, have a few things for you to deliver. It's not far away." So I was trying to deliver, but that was the only time and first time I was going to deliver. That's when they put me on forklift duty in the
Mm.
which is all this is quite different than opera, classical dance, where I
Right.
was known in magazines and books and all that. And
But that's what you have to do to kind of get yourself
yeah,
stable
yeah, I had
and get
food
yourself
and everything. And I
right.
remember one place, I had a lady and I had a small little apartment. This is in Hollywood, right off Franklin Boulevard, and a couple of blocks above Sunset Boulevard, and where all the Hollywood Boulevard is just south of Franklin. And I'll tell you this, it was amazing. I just, whatever was available. But I left that job as a forklift. And the other one, this will make it was a big difference. Everybody in New York City, or you probably heard about it by the time you were there, the Verrazano Bridge that connects Long Island to New Jersey, it hadn't been built. I would get up at
Hmm.
4 o'clock in the morning and take the subway down to the place on 30, 40, not 42nd, but 41st Street, where all the buses come in, and they would take us out to the tunnel. that went over the Hudson. There's a lot of tunnels to go to the island, but this was to New Jersey, and I stopped traffic with the other guys, asking them where they were going, what time they left the borough they were coming, and so forth. But that survey I did for about 6 weeks. And getting at 4 a.m. and taking the subway downtown, and then walking over to where the buses would take us all to the tunnel. And that resulted in the Verrazano Bridge being built from Long Island to Brooklyn. That did a lot where people, they didn't have to circle around and go under the tunnel to get to Jersey and then cross into another part of New Jersey. I worked all their bridges and things. And it was kind of hard work because I'd be out there with trucks, giving you maybe a yard between the traffic and the next lane in the tunnel. But I did it. I was very, very, very on top of everything. And because I did so well, the guy wanted me to come and work for the Port Authority, all the time. And I thought, anyway, I decided not to, because I was always waiting to get another show.
Gig.
Yeah, and the next show was working with in a big swimming show with Esther Williams. And how did what was that when I was still living in Maryland, which is 2/3 of the state is surrounded by the Chesapeake Bay and all kinds of rivers. I had my junior life saving. So I got that show. But I was always looking, and you know what I'm talking about. You have a contract, and that's the best time, but you're looking for the next contract, that will move you along in your. And I ended up working on TV and all of those things, and occasionally coming back to Mount Rainier, but the family had moved back to their ancestral home in Fredericksburg, Virginia. So I'd go there, and I'd use that to commute, which is quite a distance between Richmond and Washington. And I'd go out there, I salute everybody for helping me along.
Right.
And that's where I got my first Screen Actors Guild job. But that wasn't my first job in theater. I had under AFTRA, Screen Extras Guild, SAG, all those I'd worked in. And I had already done the show with a number of places all over the world, North Africa, Czechoslovakia, Croatia, Paris, London. And that's how I had a friend when I was between the contract. I lived up on West 86th Street. I was very lucky. I got that place. It was Dorscher's big mansion on 86th Street. And I lived there, but I could go from there to everywhere. And a friend called me, he says, Doug, how would you like to, I had a contract, I was just doing whatever. He said, well, go to the East Side. They're having a big party where all the producers and everything. Margaret Rutherford is doing a big thing. It was when they put the channel underneath the Atlantic Ocean and hooked us up with the TV. And it's about ghosts that have been in English castles. And I said, I don't know. He says, there'll be delicious food and there'll be producers there. And I said, producers? I'm going, I'll be there, because there were no parties in theater. Everything was meeting producers, people who were designers, whatever. So I went over there, and it was right on Fifth Avenue. And I was thinking, it's a huge thing when you think of all the things you're doing in theater. You yourself, Zechariah, you know what I'm saying, from Atlanta to Berlin and all that, all the things in between, and what you do. And you do it whatever you're doing, you do it to the best of your abilities. But your big thing in yours was classical music, teaching, and all that. And then mine was to be in another show, either singing, acting, or dancing, or all three. Sometimes people say, how did you learn? I said, you're always learning and you're always studying. And I said, it's never over. Of course, the big moment comes when you're on stage. It really does. because
Mm.
life as so to speak, it starts taking place the moment you walk off that stage and through the wings. People that would meet you
Right.
in the alley out stage door wanted you to be like the person they saw on stage. And they
Right.
do,
Right.
you meet all kinds of people, wonderful people.
Mm.
They were the ones that wanted
Yeah.
you to sign their program or whatever. And
Mm.
now I was going to, when originally we were going to do one of the podcast, and I was going to bring all the things from the theater. I have suitcases of pictures and programs, but it would take at least a year to go through it at a time because I
Sure.
remember
I would
Jeffrey said
imagine.
you anything you could bring over. Well, I didn't bring any of that with me today. I just wanted to go wherever you wanted me to talk about. And
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Tell me about. I want to hear a little bit more about your time in Chicago. What kind of brought you to Chicago, and what how you experienced Chicago over the years.
well, my first thing was I was with the Broadway show Fiorello, which was won the Emmys award. I was here just for a short time. We were here for about, I think, 8 or 9 weeks. And I didn't come back to Chicago again, other than a plane would land here on its way commuting to the East Coast because they were just beginning to put in these jets at that time, and you could make a trip that take you 13 hours to go across the country in 5 hours. But it was just amazing. You asked me about how I came to Chicago. I joined Hello Dolly in New York. Carol Channing was the star, superstar, and her husband was her manager. And anyway, we went all over the United States, went to Los Angeles, and then eventually made our way back to Chicago. And I was here the best part of a whole year. Everybody, the tickets then were like only, if you knew somebody, were $18, which was a lot. Now I understand it's like maybe 120, whatever. But it's just one of those things. I don't know what we were having. We weren't having any inflation, but I loved it here. I loved it, and I decided to stay here after when my contract came up for renewal. I thought, I'll tell them that I'm not going to renew. I'm going to stay here in Chicago. One, what was the big factor? Having grown up in the Maryland part, even though we had family in Virginia, North Carolina, but I was always near the Pacific, not the Pacific, but the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic. And I thought, I didn't know that Lake Michigan is like the size of an inland Mediterranean or ocean. And when I went there, I said,
Mm-hmm.
I've got to stay here. So I got living in Doris Sherry's place was really nice in New York. He's the big producer in New York at the time. And he rented out his great big mansion only to show people. 86th Street is like millionaires all the way to Central Park. And then right on the other side is the wealthy East Side.
Where did you live in Chicago?
So I lived right on the lakefront over on Cornelia. It's just a block
Mm-hmm.
in from Sheridan Road. And I became involved in being an election judge. And that was at the Lutheran church down the street. I didn't know it was a church because the place that I was working for was the Democrats in the cellar down below. And I did that a number of times when they had an election. And I enjoyed it because I'd gotten very, very involved with the city when I was at Roosevelt University, bringing different advertising shows, because little people don't realize that Chicago is like the center of putting advertising together, their writing and everything, and then it's maybe photographed in the islands or an advertisement. But I found all these things out, and I learned how to be part of it, and that was being part of it at the Lutheran. I didn't know it was a Lutheran church. And one day, I was in we're just opening up for the election. It was one of the elections. I don't remember exactly which one, but they said, we need an election judge upstairs. And I thought, because our church was not the typical, it had a great big cross and everything, parking lot, but it wasn't the typical type that, had staircases and crosses outside. They said, we need a judge who's a Republican judge upstairs. He didn't show. And anybody will volunteer. And I thought, okay, I'll volunteer. So I went upstairs and I was surprised. I thought, this is not just a place where the Lutherans have books and things. This is a church up here. Had an altar, everything. And that's how I became part of the Lutheran church. I'm a Lutheran from way back in Virginia. We had mixed things of not only Lutherans, but Catholics, everything in the family, because the family on both sides of my family, my mother's people, came here in the 1700s on the Haw River. Burlington, it was the town that they put together. They used to have people go across the Haw River going south in the country. And I said, so my father's people came in the late 1850s. They came here after the English Civil War, I think, which was like in the 1830s. They'd come from Germany, and then they went to Northern Ireland, came to U.S., and then they got land grants down in North Carolina from the royal family. But it was really something, because the royal family didn't end there. Even though I was working when I was going to Roosevelt University, I'd finish at 4:00. I had a scholarship. I paid my own way to begin, and then I got a scholarship and a grant for the rest of my degree, which was a bachelor's degree. And everybody was saying, why aren't you staying in it for theater? And I thought, it's changed a lot. It's like quite different. Everybody's out banging around in bars and things in the theater and putting it on TV. And I said, I don't want that. So I went into the business world, even opened up a big art gallery. And I won't go into that. It was right on the lakefront. And all my writing skills, I put all the stuff together with the banks for loans. And I went to Paris and got major artwork. And I go to New York, which is a lot of place for distributing major art, not only expensive, but buyable. And then I'd come to Chicago, and it would be all framed by Peterson at that time. And how did I learn to do that? Because one of the things I did after I left my first division was how to sell art and train the people. And I came up where the head of my lawyer, he graduated from Notre Dame, but his roommate was Gary Beebe. He was the executive vice president of the big people that have places all over the country. And he got me supposedly before some competitor intervened. And I had opened the gallery, and we were having like $45,000 days. We'd have wine tasting. And one of my people that I work with, the Hanson family, they were artists, but they graduated from the Art Institute. And they had also been head of advertising at the big air base south of Chicago. And so they moved into my gallery and so forth. I won't go into why it didn't fail. There was a problem with a competitor who did things that I don't want to go into. you know. But I left it, and I had people say, "Oh, well, we can get rid of them." And I thought, I don't. When you say get rid of them, I thought, what are they talking about? I was never raised
Mm,
to do things like that to anybody who was a competitor otherwise. So I went into being a mental health clinician with Ray Graham out in Oak Brook, and that was for like 16 years, and learned everything about mental, and put my bachelor's degree. I had some
how did
80
that
people that.
opportunity? How did that opportunity come up to work in to work in the mental health
Well,
field?
I saw it in the paper. That was after the thing that didn't work out in the art field, because I used to also
Mm,
paintings of the world. I worked at the Hilton, right where the buses come in to take you to the airport, and that's where I learned everything. I ran not only their place in Chicago, but at the Hilton in New York, their paintings of the world in Detroit, so forth, because of my background. And it was very easy. And you understand this when you've spent most of your adult life with people, new people, and how to do your best. When you're in theater, it was very easy to come to, to work in the art field. But then I graduated into the mental health and was with it for
mm,
16 years and loved it. And then we were defunded. And but I was already at the Lakeview Lutheran Church. It all took place on a Good Friday, and I remember the people who were. It was the first time I came to one of the things that would have been around like 1980 or 81, and it was just wonderful. I met people that were just absolutely great, and that's when. It wasn't long after that when I even met you, and I met the family, and we had transcending different reverends. And eventually, and I would work as an assistant on the altar with the reverend, turning the page or singing a little song or sing dialogue or turning the page as it progressed, and helping with uh, the communion and all that. And it was wonderful. I really became very involved, and also I took on the experiences I had with the working at Roosevelt University. I joined the Chicago Police Department's neighborhood relations, which was right across the street from the church. Their second
mm,
building, the other one was right over on Broadway, and it's still there. It was the oldest police station in the United States, right here in Chicago. But I became involved in that as the secretary for the Chicago Police Department Neighborhood Relations, and we still do a lot of things with the the police, with seniors, with the churches, and I always used to give a copy of the notes to Lila as to what we were doing next. And the church was very involved in uh, finding things and places for the needy, because we had a place downstairs where the men, until they give them coordination for jobs or housing, was doing all of that. And that was wonderful. I'll tell you, that was just wonderful to be involved in that.
mm,
But
mhm,
right now, I'm 89 years old, and I have still a lot of energy. But I had so much energy. I was and you know what I'm talking about, to be able to do a number of things, see agents, work in the church, work with the neighborhood relations as and doing all of it. And other than doing the side thing as a mental health clinician, I had a CDL, a commercial driver's license for a big school bus. Not easy, because you have to take a yearly test, doing everything imaginable to keep it going backwards, backing and everything. And I thought, heavens, if they ever put the people who are out on the street driving cars, there would be nobody driving the cars. And then the people who sell cars wouldn't be selling cars. But so they don't put them through that. But I drove for 2 or 3 different bus companies, even working some routes. If the regular bus driver wasn't there, I put my clients, which were 80 people, with the place out in the suburbs and in mental health and all that. They were all seniors. And my youngest, you had to be 21. And my oldest, she was 81. Many of them were wards of the state. And she was 81 and she was called baby. And but I'd make all the arrangements through doctors, lawyers, everything for the year. It was twice a year, and then they cut it back because of funding from the state. But I was very, very involved with what they were doing, transcending it over to LakeView Lutheran, because they were involved in all of that, finding them work, finding them a place to live, even coordinating them with any kind of medical issues that were needed. It was wonderful to see that happening. And also singing in the choir. I would go to one rehearsal. Usually the rehearsal was earlier before church. And we went through every kind of thing. And I remember we had the top people. The bishop once came and said our choir was just fabulous. And I thought, well, that's great for him to tell us that. And I don't know. I was able just to do, I was multifaceted. I had the energy and the know-how, and it didn't seem to bother me. And I'm not saying that I can't still do that, but I don't have the physical energy. Like they wanted me to come to Washington after working in the elections. And I, having grown up there and having been born there, and during the war, we came up from Richmond and lived in Baltimore till the war was over. Then we moved back to Washington, D.C. area, Mount Rainier, which is walking distance within about 8 blocks of stepping into the Capitol. And it was just wonderful. I didn't regret any of it. And I met wonderful people. And that was when I first became associated, more or less, other than the party that I told you back not a few minutes ago, about me going to the party on the East Side. And there were all these people from Broadway shows. And then I was off sitting in a side room. Remember, was the big palace home that was the people that originally put one of the biggest Broadway hits ever to hit, about the theater in the Midwest. And a guy came in, and I was sitting in one of the side rooms. I wasn't in the room where they were all tasting hors d'oeuvres and drinking. And I thought, I didn't really know people lived like this, but it was like a palace just off the room with a fountain and greenery and everything. This is right off Fifth Avenue. And a man came in, and he was dressed in buckskins. And he said, "Oh, why aren't you in there?" And I said, "I'm just enjoying myself." And I said, "Who are you?" He said, just call me by his nickname. And I said, "Oh, okay." I said, "I'll let you a little bit inside." Turned out he was 8th in line to the British throne. This was the thing that Margaret Rutherford was giving a ghost that were in English castles and how they associated with all the big families, the Washington family, Jefferson, all of them, and how they got their land grants in North Carolina, and different parts of the early part of our country. But it was just interesting. Years later, he was here and I went with him. I found out he was a member of the royal family, and he said, "I'll come and I'll stay." And I said, "I'll make you a place at the Drake Hotel down on Michigan Avenue," because people didn't know that the royal family owned about 50% of the stock for that Drake Hotel. It's a lot of stock. And he said, "No, I don't want to stay there. I'll stay with you." And I said, "Well, I live on Montrose Avenue, just off the lakefront. Now I wasn't living at Cornelia anymore, and so he came and I had 3 bedrooms in that place. I loved it. It was right on Cornelia, opposite the graveyard across the street, which is a world class. All the famous people are buried there in the history of the country. And so he said, I'm giving a big thing up, to his name was Lord Edward Montague. The Montagues had a big family, in the southern England. And he had invited me to come there on his 70th birthday. Now, that's some time ago. That was like in 1997. And he said, you must come with me because I'm going to give a whole speech of how all the big English families in the United States at the beginning of your country were associated with all the royal families of England and the land grants and all that. So I'll never forget, I went up to what is the town just over the border up there, the lake?
Evanston?
Yeah, to Evanston. The Evanston ladies group were giving a big thing, for the hen. And when you're with the royals, you always step in back of them a step. You never step side by side or in front of them. And I had a beautiful red vest that I gotten when I was in England, like the military. And I put on my tuxedo with the black bow tie. And when we got up and started talking, I remember a lady approached me and she said, "Are you the new royal one day? Are you are you his son?" I said, "No, just a very close friend." She thought I was part of the royal family, but he stayed with me for about a week or so until he had to go back to England. But he had come to me from Toronto to Los Angeles, and then I picked him up at O'Hare, and he stayed rather than at the Drake Hotel. And I don't know, we had a good time. And he said, before we leave, he said, I have to, it was still warm weather. It was like September. I've never swam in Lake Michigan. He said, because when I go over to England, I stay at his place, the big home and palace in the south of England, right near where Dunkirk faces at night. You can see the reflection of France in the clouds, way on the other side of that strait between England. And he said, I'll go to the English room and lunch. And then he said, my plane doesn't leave till like 4:00. And I said, are you flying back to England? He said, no, I'm going to Toronto. I have lots of relatives there. I said, oh, really? He said, if you don't have a title and you're a member of a royal family, people come to the United States or Canada, connected with, relatives and everything. So that was really very, very enlightening. I remember we had a delicious meal at the English and then went back to the house. He got his bathing clothes. I didn't go I sat on the beach while he went in the water and splashed around. Then he came back because I had to get him back to the O'Hare clock for a 4:00 flight to Toronto to visit relatives, and from there going home. But when later on, when I went to the thing another time when Margaret Ruther, this wasn't for Margaret Ruther, it was his 70th birthday. He passed away in 2012, Edward Montague. At that time, he was no longer the 8th thing to the throne because Diane's children, and he, the oldest one of the boys, now the king of Charles. And so I stayed at I was going to stay at the palace, but he said, no, you can stay at the room, the big place over near the lake and everything. And I thought, what is that? Well, when I went there, goes back to the 10th century. I had a whole thing in the hunting lodge. Many of the people who had come from Australia, New England, Zealand, we were all staying there, but some of the people were staying at the palace. Because while I was there, he had a big luncheon and everything, and I met his youngest brother Edward was having his birthday at the national place where all the cars that England has ever invented is. The museum is there, plus the English hunting places at Beaulieu Castle in the south. Only little, like 33,000 acres. You could sit in the. I had butlers and everything waiting on me. I had a room that in the 10th century, the people that came and for a while where they had a mixing Germany with the English. And I thought in this room, it has a history, what has gone on in this, but it had ice boxes, a bathtub that was 3 times the size of any bathtub I'd ever seen. But it was wonderful. When he was presented for his birthday, the royals were there. The youngest son, Edward, was over having his birthday at the big place for automobiles. And they all came back over because we were having so much fun. And I met all the royal family. The Queen was not there, but Charles was there. And then Edward, his party for his own birthday over at the museum, on the grounds, all this stuff. They came over to our party, and how was he presented to the people? There was a great big Duesenberg in the stage. We were all dancing. I was dancing with the person who was her husband was the mayor of London. And she says, "Oh, I must tell Lord Montague to invite you again. You're a wonderful dancer." I didn't tell her that I taught dancing, classical. I work with ballroom dancing, everything. I mean, and it was just amazing. But I mean, it was just great, and it was still my connection. I was doing these things with the LakeView Lutheran Church, doing all these things, and being the person who was my role with the Chicago Police Department across the street, doing all that, writing up everything. And I never thought about it. I had the energy, and physically, I never had any medical problems. The most medicine I ever took was a child's aspirin, once a day. Never had any illnesses whatsoever. And you know how
It
important
sounds
that
like
is.
you've lived. Yeah, it sounds like you've lived about 10 lifetimes in your one life.
Multiply that by another 10, square it to 100, So
Yeah,
what I'm talking
yeah.
about. Not only have you yourself, Zachariah, been on the classical stage in Berlin, you were with the Atlanta Symphony, you did everything. So you know what I'm talking about. It was wonderful when you were performing. It wasn't not wonderful when you weren't performing. You just knew that was part of the thing, to be looking for other contracts, meeting producers, having the opportunity. You as a teacher now, I didn't teach voice, although I studied opera and I studied other things, but I just, it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. And if I could physically do it
Sure.
now I want to live long enough where I'm part of a society, the Newsweek Society, which is in Texas, and live long enough to where I can go down and go to CVS or to what's the other big place? Walgreens, and get a part replaced because they can grow up your cell and make another part of your body. So I can live to be 125. So I don't know, whatever, you know all of this. I'm not, and you know that it was very dear to you whenever you're performing. And I've seen you play and do great things. I remember when you were 7 or 8, of course, your mother was with the arts program of Chicago in the school system, and she knew all the thing about teaching And no wonder a youngster like you played a piano like a professional when you were just a youngster. I remember it was
Very
fabulous to
kind of
see.
you.
Yeah, and then I hadn't seen you in all those years when you were all over the world and teaching and getting your master's degree and everything in Georgia at Atlanta.
Mm.
And it was just wonderful. And here comes this tall guy who the last time I saw you were about 17 when you were leaving to go to
Hmm.
the University of
To go to
Georgia.
school. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I hadn't seen you. And here's this tall guy who the last time I saw was a teenager with a beard. And I thought, and you introduced yourself and you said you were just great helping me get. I did like a whole month of vocalizing every day because the classical version and the breathing is a lot different than the
Mm.
Lord's Prayer in the prayer book, And I'll never get
Sure.
how
Yeah.
at this point in my life how you helped me get through it because I didn't believe I could do it, and you would say, "You come on, Doug, you can do it. You can do it."
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm sorry to cut us off here, but we're a little bit out of time. But it's been a pleasure hearing all your stories and hearing about all your journeys and adventures. And
I have a little
thank you.
sign from it goes over the woods and through the woods to grandmother's house we go. The horse knows the sleigh to take us to grandmother's home. Over the river and through the woods, oh how the wind doth blow! It nips your nose and bites your toes. From over the river we go. The horse knows the way to carry the sleigh through the white and drifted snow. Everybody, God bless you all. God bless you, Zachary, and your family. And Reverend Bukama making this possible.